My son said, "You're a guest here, pay rent or leave," after my husband died. So I took the original deed and served an eviction notice. The silence in the house after my husband, Daniel, passed away was a physical presence that pressed against my chest with every breath. It wasn't the clean, empty silence of an abandoned building. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the ghosts of his booming laughter echoing from the kitchen where he used to flip pancakes on Sunday mornings. The phantom sound of his work boots on the hardwood floors he'd laid himself plank by painstaking plank, and the lingering scent of cherry wood that still drifted from his workshop like incense from a shrine. For 45 years, this sprawling Victorian house nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont had been our sanctuary, our fortress against the world. Now, it felt like my gilded cage, and my own son, my flesh and blood, was about to become the warden holding the keys. My name is Margaret Byen, and this is the story of how I learned that blood is not always thicker than water, but ink on a legal document almost always is. The conversation that would change everything happened on a gray, drizzly afternoon in October, exactly 6 months to the day after we'd lowered Daniel's mahogany casket into the cold Vermont earth. The maple trees outside our bay window were ablaze in their final, defiant glory, brilliant reds and golds that seemed to mock the colorless world inside these walls. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories that cut like glass every time I turned a corner and expected to see him there. My son Mark and his wife Jennifer had invited themselves over for what they called a family financial review. The phrase alone should have been my first warning. In 45 years of marriage, Daniel and I had never needed a family financial review. We'd needed love, laughter, and the occasional heated discussion about whether we could afford new gutters. But we'd never needed a corporate-style meeting to discuss our lives. They sat across from me at the solid maple dining table Daniel had built for our 25th anniversary, each joint fitted so perfectly you couldn't slide a piece of paper between them. The table had hosted thousands of meals, homework sessions, birthday celebrations, and quiet morning coffees. Now it felt like a courtroom bench with me as the defendant. Jennifer, a woman whose ambition wore designer pantsuits and carried Italian leather briefcases, had her laptop open, its screen glowing with the cold blue light of spreadsheets filled with numbers that supposedly represented my life. She'd positioned herself at the head of the table, Daniel's spot, with the unconscious authority of someone who'd already decided she was in charge. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe chignon that made her sharp features look even more predatory, and her manicured fingers clicked across the keyboard with mechanical precision. Mark, who had inherited his father's deep brown eyes but none of his soul, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze like a guilty child. He'd always been a passenger in his own life, content to let others make the difficult decisions while he nodded along with whatever seemed easiest. Now, at 38 years old, he was still letting someone else drive while he stared out the window, and Jennifer was firmly gripping the steering wheel with both hands. "Mom," Mark began, his voice strained and hollow, the words coming out like he'd rehearsed them in front of a mirror. "We need to be realistic about your situation. This house, it's become a huge financial burden. The property taxes alone are nearly $10,000 a year, and that's not including the heating bills that run close to $3,000 every winter, the insurance premiums, the landscaping service, the maintenance costs. You simply can't manage all of this on your own anymore." I felt my fingers tighten around the delicate china teacup I'd been holding, one from the set Daniel had given me for our 10th anniversary. Decorated with tiny blue roses that had always reminded me of the wildflowers that grew behind his workshop. "Your father and I managed just fine for 45 years, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm building in my chest. "We raised you in this house, Mark. We celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone of your life right here at this table." Jennifer cut in with the surgical precision of a corporate raider, her voice crisp and devoid of any warmth or emotion. "Daniel isn't here anymore, Margaret." She always called me Margaret, never mom, never anything that suggested I was family rather than an obstacle to be managed. The financial reality has fundamentally changed. We've been analyzing your accounts and the numbers don't lie. Your pension and Social Security will barely cover your basic living expenses, let alone the overhead of maintaining a 4,000 square foot Victorian house in this market. She clicked a key on her laptop with theatrical flair, rotating the screen so I could see her perfectly organized budget projections, complete with color-coded charts and graphs that reduced my life to red numbers and declining percentages. We've been subsidizing your expenses since Dad died, paying the utilities, the landscaping service, the homeowner's insurance, the emergency repairs. It's simply not sustainable for us long-term. We have our own future to think about, our own financial obligations. Marcus starts high school next year and Emma will be looking at colleges soon. Their futures depend on us making smart financial decisions now. I stared at her, feeling something cold and sharp twist in my stomach. Subsidizing. They had graciously set up automatic payments from an account I couldn't access, an account that held the $200,000 life insurance payout from Daniel's policy, money that was meant to provide security for my golden years, not convenience for their financial planning. So, she continued, getting to the heart of the matter with the ruthless efficiency of a loan shark calling in a debt. We have a proposal for you. We've identified 2 viable options that will work for everyone involved. She paused for dramatic effect, her perfectly shaped eyebrows raised like a theater director waiting for the spotlight to hit her star performer. Option 1, she said, her tone taking on the false brightness of a real estate agent showing a property she knows is overpriced, is that you start contributing your fair share. We've calculated a reasonable market rent for a room in a house of this caliber in this geographical area. $2,000 a month would help cover your proportional share of the household expenses and allow you to continue living here under our care and supervision. $2,000. $2,000 to live in my own home, in the house where I'd planted every flower in the garden, where I'd painted every room at least twice, where I'd nursed my husband through his final illness. And option 2, I asked, my voice dangerously calm, the way it used to get when Mark was a teenager and had pushed me to the very edge of my patience. Option 2, she said, her tone hardening like concrete setting in winter, is that you find alternative accommodations. We can certainly help you locate a small, manageable apartment in town, something more appropriate for a woman of your age and circumstances, something you can actually afford. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. You need to understand something, Margaret, you're a guest here now. A guest in our house, and it's time you either started paying for your room like any other boarder or found other accommodations that better suit your budget. A guest in the house where I had rocked my infant son to sleep during those long, sleepless nights when he had colic. A guest in the bedroom where I had held my husband's hand as cancer slowly stole his breath, where I had whispered promises to love him in sickness and in health until his heart finally stopped beating. The cruelty of it was so breathtaking, so perfectly calculated, that for a moment I couldn't speak. I looked at Mark, my son, my only child, the boy I had carried for 9 months and loved for 38 years, searching his face for a flicker of protest, a hint of shame, any sign that the man I had raised was still somewhere inside this stranger sitting at my table. He said nothing. He just stared at his hands, studying his wedding ring like it held the secrets of the universe, a silent and willing accomplice to his wife's brutal ultimatum. His silence was the real betrayal, her words were just the weapon she wielded, but his cowardice was the hand that guided it. I felt something fundamental shift inside me, like a tectonic plate of grief and unconditional love grinding against the hard bedrock of indignation and righteous anger. The woman who had wept quietly for 6 months, who had shuffled through this house like a ghost haunting her own life, was gone. In her place was someone I hadn't seen in years, Margaret Byen, the daughter of a steel worker and a union organizer, a woman who understood a thing or two about fighting for what was rightfully hers. I see, I said, my voice betraying none of the earthquake happening inside my chest. You've made your position very clear. I appreciate your directness. I'll need some time to consider my options and make an informed decision. They left that afternoon, confident and victorious, walking out of my house with the satisfied swagger of corporate executives who had just closed a profitable deal. They had laid out their terms with mathematical precision. They had asserted their control with legal authority. They thought they had cornered a grieving widow, a helpless old woman with nowhere to turn and no options left. They had no idea they had just awakened a sleeping giant. My ledger wasn't a leather-bound book filled with numbers and calculations. It was a memory, sharp and clear as crystal, polished by time into something precious and unbreakable. The memory of a conversation with my Daniel, just over a year before the cancer started eating away at his lungs like acid through metal. We were sitting on the back porch swing he'd built from reclaimed barn wood, watching the fireflies dance their ancient ballet in the purple twilight of a perfect summer evening. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and my grandmother's climbing roses, and somewhere in the distance, we could hear the lonely whistle of the freight train that ran through the valley twice a day. Daniel was worried about Mark, the way a father worries when he sees his son making choices that will lead to heartbreak. He's a good boy at heart, Maggie, Daniel had said, tamping down the sweet tobacco in his favorite pipe, the one I'd given him for our 20th anniversary, carved from briarwood by an artisan in North Carolina. But he's weak where it counts. He lets that woman lead him around by the nose like a prize bull at the county fair. She's all sharp edges and naked ambition with a smile that never reaches her eyes. She sees this house, this land, not as our home or his inheritance, but as a future asset to be liquidated when it becomes convenient. He loves her, Daniel, I had said, ever the peacemaker, ever the mother trying to see the best in everyone. He chose her. That has to count for something. He's not in love with her, sweetheart, my husband had corrected gently, blowing smoke rings that dissolved into the gathering darkness. He's infatuated with her strength because he's never developed his own. She makes decisions so he doesn't have to. She takes charge so he can drift along like a leaf on the current. But one day when I'm gone and you're alone, she's going to try to take this place from you. She'll see you as an obstacle to be removed, not a mother to be honored. That night, after we'd gone inside and I was washing the dinner dishes, he had taken me into his workshop. It was his sanctuary, filled with the tools his own father had passed down to him and the scent of sawdust and wood stain that I had learned to associate with his contentment. From behind a loose stone in the old fireplace hearth, a hiding place he'd discovered when we first bought the house, he pulled out a small steel strongbox that I'd never seen before. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth like a sacred relic, was a single folded document, yellowed slightly with age but still crisp and official. This is the original deed to the house from when we first bought it back in 1976, he explained, unfolding it carefully on his workbench. Look at the names, Maggie, Margaret Byen and Daniel Byen. We're listed as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. That's the legal terminology that means when one of us dies, the other automatically owns the whole property. But when we paid off the mortgage 20 years ago, I had our lawyer, James Patterson, file some additional paperwork. I signed my half of the house, my entire legal interest in the property, over to a trust. A trust you didn't even know existed. He had pulled out a second document, thick and complex, filled with legal language that looked like it had been written in a foreign dialect of English. This is the Byen Family Legacy Trust, he'd said, his voice taking on the formal tone he used when he was deadly serious about something. James Patterson is the trustee and you, Margaret Byen, are the sole beneficiary. My half of the house doesn't belong to me anymore, it belongs to this trust. And the trust's instructions are very, very specific. You have lifetime tenancy rights to live in this house, undisturbed and uncontested. No one can remove you, no one can charge you rent. No one can make you feel unwelcome in your own home. Upon your death, the trust will dissolve and my half of the house will pass to Mark, but not one day before. and only if he has treated you with the honor and respect you deserve as his mother." He had looked at me then, his eyes full of love and a fierce, protective fire that I'd only seen a few times in our marriage, when the doctor told us I might lose the baby that became Mark. When my father died and left me heartbroken when the bank tried to foreclose on us during that terrible recession in the 80s. "She'll never find this documentation, Maggie," he'd continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The county records will just show our original joint tenancy. She'll assume that upon my death my half automatically transferred to you and that the house is now entirely yours to be controlled or contested by your heir. She won't know about the trust, about the protections I've put in place. It's our secret, it's your insurance policy. It's your fortress." I had cried that night, not understanding the depth of his foresight, thinking he was being morbid and paranoid, wishing he would stop talking about death and trusts and legal protections. Now, sitting in the silence of my house with Jennifer's ultimatum echoing in my ears, I understood with crystal clarity. My husband hadn't just left me a house. He had left me a sword and a shield, carefully forged in the fires of his love and his understanding of human nature. The next morning, while Mark and Jennifer were at their respective offices planning their future in my house and calculating how much money they could squeeze from my desperation, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to James Patterson, the lawyer who had been our family's legal counsel for over 30 years. A tall, spare man whose quiet demeanor and gentle voice hid a mind like a steel trap and a moral compass that always pointed toward justice. "James," I said when his secretary put me through, "it's Margaret Byen. It's time to activate the trust." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Then James cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice carried the controlled fury of a man who had just witnessed a great injustice. "Tell me everything, Margaret, every word, every detail, every threat they made." I told him about the spreadsheets and the ultimatum. I told him about being called a guest in my own home. I told him about the demand for rent and the 72-hour deadline to decide my fate. I told him about Mark's silence, his cowardice, his willingness to let his wife destroy his relationship with his mother for the sake of financial convenience. The silence on the other end of the line grew heavy with controlled rage. "That woman," James said finally, his voice dangerously low and precise, "has the moral compass of a corporate raider and the heart of a lone shark. And Mark, God help him, Margaret. Daniel would be heartbroken to see what his son has become." Daniel was prepared for this possibility, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. He saw it coming from a mile away. "What's our first move?" "We don't need a move, Margaret," he said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction creeping into his tone. "We need a declaration of war. We serve them, not with a lawsuit. Lawsuits take months and cost money you shouldn't have to spend. We serve them with the truth. A formal notice from the trust reminding them of your lifetime tenancy rights and their status as guests who have violated the terms of their welcome. And, for good measure, a legal eviction notice for the unauthorized occupants who have attempted to extort money from the rightful tenant." My second call was to Murphy's Lock and Key, a local locksmith who had been changing locks and fixing security systems in our area for 20 years. "Mrs. Byen," Murphy said when I explained what I needed, "are you sure about this? I mean, these are family members we're talking about." "Mr. Murphy," I replied, "family members don't threaten to make their mother homeless. Family members don't demand rent for the privilege of living in the house where they were raised. Please come this afternoon. I'll pay you double your usual rate if you can have it done before 5 o'clock. When Mark and Jennifer returned home that evening, pulling into the driveway in Jennifer's silver BMW with its vanity license plate that read "Success," they found a small, polite notice taped to the front door. Printed on James Patterson's official letterhead with its distinguished law firm logo and formal typography. The notice, written in the precise legal language that lawyers use when they want to be absolutely clear about their intentions, informed them that as unauthorized occupants who had attempted to illegally extort funds from the primary beneficiary of the Byen Family Legacy Trust, Their implied residency was hereby terminated. It gave them 72 hours to vacate the premises and remove all personal property or face formal eviction proceedings and possible charges of attempted fraud. They also discovered when Jennifer tried to unlock the front door with her usual confidence that their keys no longer worked. I watched from the upstairs bedroom window, the window where I had watched Mark take his first steps on the front lawn, where I had watched him leave for his first day of school, where I had watched him drive away to college with his car packed full of hopes and dreams as their confusion transformed into disbelief and then into pure, sputtering rage. Mark rattled the doorknob like a caged animal, his face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. Jennifer frantically dialed her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers stabbing at the screen with increasing desperation, her corporate composure cracking like ice on a spring pond. My phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. Jennifer. I let it ring and ring and ring. When it finally stopped, it immediately started ringing again, then again, then again. They spent the night in the Hampton Inn on Route 9 and I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, they returned with reinforcements. A slick young attorney from Jennifer's corporate law firm, a man who clearly thought he could intimidate a grieving widow and her small-town lawyer with big city bluster and expensive suits. The meeting took place on my front porch because I refused to let them back into my house. James stood beside me, calm and implacable as a mountain, his weathered hands holding a briefcase that contained 45 years of careful legal planning. Their lawyer, who introduced himself as Bradley something from the prestigious firm of Someone and Associates, started with all the authority and arrogance of a man who had never lost a case to country lawyers and elderly women. Mrs. Byron, he began, his voice dripping with condescension, my clients are prepared to pursue this matter through the courts if necessary. You've illegally evicted family members from their legal residence. You've changed locks on property that partially belongs to your son as your heir. You've caused them emotional distress and financial hardship. We're prepared to seek damages for unlawful eviction, breach of implied tenancy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. James let him finish his entire rehearsed speech. He let the young lawyer puff himself up like a peacock displaying his feathers. Then he calmly reached into his briefcase and handed him a copy of the trust document. Read Article 4, Section B, James said politely, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had been practicing law since before this young hotshot was born. Take your time, it's somewhat complex legal language. The young lawyer's face went pale as he read. His eyes darted back and forth across the page, scanning the legal terminology with increasing alarm. He read it again, more slowly. He looked at Jennifer, then at Mark, then back at the document. He closed his briefcase with the defeated click of a man who had just realized he'd brought a knife to a gunfight. My clients will vacate the premises within the stipulated 72-hour period, he said, his voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance and authority. He turned to Jennifer and Mark, his expensive suit suddenly looking rumpled and cheap. There's nothing I can do for you here. You're not his heirs, not yet. Legally speaking, you're tenants at will who have violated the terms of your occupancy. You have no standing, no rights, and no recourse. I strongly advise you to comply with the eviction notice immediately. The next 48 hours were a quiet, efficient flurry of activity that felt like watching a movie in fast forward. They hired professional movers, a crew of efficient men who wrapped their expensive furniture in blankets and loaded it into trucks with the businesslike indifference of people who had seen family disputes tear apart households before. Mark tried to speak to me once as he was carrying a box of his old college textbooks and childhood memorabilia out to the moving truck. His face was haggard, aged 10 years in 2 days, and his eyes held something I hadn't seen since he was a child, genuine remorse. Mom, he started, his voice thick with a mixture of shame and anger and something that might have been grief. I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted. Didn't you, Mark? I asked, looking him directly in the eye for the first time in months, my voice steady and clear as church bells. You sat there at that table yesterday, you said nothing while your wife called me a guest in my own home. You watched her demand rent from your mother without saying a single word in my defense. Your silence was your consent, sweetheart. Your father saw this weakness in you years ago. He was just hoping you would outgrow it, that you would become a man worthy of the name Bayan. He had no answer for that. He just turned and carried his box to the truck, his shoulders hunched with defeat. The day they left, the house felt different. The oppressive weight of tension and resentment was gone, replaced by a peaceful, echoing quiet that felt like the first deep breath after holding it for months. I walked through the empty rooms, my hand trailing along the walls Daniel had painted, reclaiming my territory one room at a time, but I wasn't finished. My husband had left me a fortress, and now I was going to use it to build something beautiful. I didn't want to live in that big house alone anymore. It was filled with too many ghosts, both good and bad, and the silence echoed with memories that cut both ways. So I called a different kind of architect, a woman named Maria Flores, who ran a firm that specialized in creating multi-generational and cooperative living communities. I have a house, I told her during our first meeting, and I have a vision. I don't want to live alone, rattling around in 4,000 square feet of memories. And I know there are other women like me, widows whose children have abandoned them, divorcees starting over, women who are strong and capable but are being forced into isolation by circumstances beyond their control. I want to turn this house into a home. A real home for a new kind of family. Over the next 18 months, we transformed the house. We didn't tear down walls, we opened them up, creating flow and connection while maintaining privacy and independence. We converted the large master suite into 2 comfortable private apartments, each with its own bathroom and sitting area. We turned the formal living room, which had been gathering dust since Daniel died, into a vibrant communal library and art studio filled with natural light and comfortable reading chairs. Daniel's old workshop became a shared creative space for gardening, woodworking, pottery, and whatever hobbies brought us joy. I called it the Bayan House. Our motto, engraved on a simple bronze plaque beside the front door, came from one of my favorite poems by Marge Piercy, To Be of Use. My first housemate was Alina Morrison, a retired music teacher whose adult children had moved her into a cramped senior living facility because her baby grand piano took up too much space in their modern minimalist home. The day we moved her piano into our new library and music room, she sat down at the bench with tears streaming down her face and played a Chopin nocturne so beautiful it seemed to make the very walls of the house sing with joy. My second was Susan Chen, a divorce lawyer in her late 60s whose husband of 30 years had left her for his 25-year-old paralegal, taking half their assets and leaving her with a mountain of legal bills and a broken heart. She was a master gardener who had once been featured in Better Homes and Gardens, and she transformed our backyard into a paradise of flowers, herbs, and vegetables that fed our bodies and our souls. My third housemate was myself. I took the smallest of the private apartments, the one overlooking Susan's garden, and filled it with my books, my photographs, my quilts, and a profound sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. We weren't a nursing home or an assisted living facility. We were a cooperative, a chosen family of strong women who had decided that our final chapters would be written on our own terms. We shared expenses and chores according to our abilities. We shared stories and wisdom according to our experiences. We were sisters forged not from blood or obligation, but from mutual respect and a fierce determination to live our remaining years with dignity, purpose, and joy. About 18 months after the Bayan House was established and thriving, I received a letter that made my hands shake as I opened it. It was from Mark, written in his own handwriting on simple drugstore stationery, no lawyer's letterhead, no corporate logo, no legal threats or financial ultimatums. He and Jennifer had divorced, he wrote. She had left him the moment it became clear that there was no inheritance to be claimed, no house to be sold, no nest egg to be plundered. She had taken half of everything they'd built together and moved to Portland, where she was dating a tech entrepreneur she'd met on a business trip. Mark was working as a high school history teacher now in a small town about 2 hours away. He was living in a modest apartment he could barely afford, driving a used car, shopping at thrift stores, learning for the first time in his adult life what it meant to live within his means. "I think about Dad every day," he wrote, his handwriting shaky with emotion. "I think about the kind of man he was and the kind of man I failed to become. I think about the lessons he tried to teach me that I was too proud and too foolish to learn. I don't expect you to forgive me, Mom. I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what he was trying to tell me all those years. A home isn't an asset to be leveraged or liquidated. It's a life to be lived, a legacy to be cherished, a sanctuary to be protected. And I threw mine away for 30 pieces of silver and a woman who never loved me for anything more than my potential inheritance." He didn't ask for money, he didn't ask to move back in, he didn't ask for anything except one small favor. "Could I come visit Dad's workshop sometime?" he wrote. "I'd like to try and finish that birdhouse he was carving for me, the one I was too busy with my career and my marriage to care about when I was a teenager. I know it's probably still there on his workbench, covered in dust and disappointment. I'd like to finish it, if you'll let me. Not because I think it will fix anything, but because I finally understand that some things are more important than profit margins and property values." I sat on the back porch swing that Daniel had built, holding the letter in hands that were steadier than they'd been in months, and looked out at the thriving garden Susan had planted. Through the open windows, I could hear Alina playing a gentle Bach invention, and from the kitchen came the sound of laughter as the three of us prepared dinner together. I felt my husband's presence then, not as a ghost of what was lost, but as the living, breathing foundation of everything we had built from the ashes of his death. I wrote back to my son for the first time in 2 years. My note was short, written on my personal stationery with the fountain pen Daniel had given me for our silver anniversary. "The workshop is always open," I wrote. "The tools are exactly where your father left them, and so is the birdhouse. It's waiting for you to finish it, just like he always knew you would when you were ready." If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support means everything to us and helps us bring you more stories of courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Tell us in the comments below, what would you have done in Margaret's situation?